Hello, everyone. I am the sleep storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax. The wind whispered across the rolling hills of ancient Ireland, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the distant echo of unseen voices. The sky hung heavy with storm clouds, their dark bellies glowing with the flickering promise of lightning. In this vast and untamed land, where the veil between the mortal world and the divine was thin, there was a presence that lingered just beyond the edge of sight. A lone crow soared through the sky, its wings cutting through the stillness like a blade. It was no ordinary bird, nor was its journey one of chance. Where the crow flew, fate followed. And where fate stirred, the Morrigan was never far behind. Her name was spoken in hushed tones, wrapped in both reverence and fear. For she was no simple goddess bound to a single purpose. She was war and wisdom, prophecy and destruction, a force as relentless as the tide, and as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. She did not merely observe the world, she shaped it. Even the mightiest warriors, those who laughed in the face of death, would shudder at the thought of meeting her gaze, for she knew what they did not, that the end was already written. The land pulsed with an ancient rhythm, a heartbeat that echoed through the stones, the rivers, the roots of the trees. To the Tuatha De Danann, the divine rulers of Ireland, the Morrigan was both ally and enigma. Among them, she moved as a shadow, slipping between roles as effortlessly as the mist shifting over the hills. Some saw her as a guardian of sovereignty, the spirit of the land itself, choosing its rulers and casting down the unworthy. Others knew her as the harbinger of war, appearing on the battlefield in the guise of a crow, her cries foretelling victory or ruin. But there were those who whispered of an even darker truth, that she was death itself, a silent promise waiting to be fulfilled. Her origins were woven into the oldest of stories, passed from one generation to the next like sacred fire. She was the daughter of Ernmas, one of the mighty Tuatha De Danann, and sister to others who wielded power beyond mortal comprehension. Yet, unlike the others, the Morrigan was never confined to a single form. She was many things at once, shifting between faces, between shapes, between realms. Some claimed she was three, not one Matcha, Bodibi, and Nemin, each a fragment of the greater whole. Together, they formed a triad of war and fate, each playing a role in the chaos and order of existence. She had walked this land since time immemorial, her feet pressing against the damp soil long before the names of kings were carved into stone. When the Tuatha De Danann descended upon Ireland, claiming it as their own, she was there, watching from the edges of the fray. It was in the battles against the monstrous Fomorians that her legend took shape. She did not simply fight, she ensured that fate unraveled as it should. As swords clashed and shields shattered, she moved unseen, whispering into the ears of warriors, filling their hearts with fire, or striking them with paralyzing fear. The battlefield was her domain, a tapestry woven with blood and steel. The cries of ravens filled the air as she took her place among them, her dark wings spread wide, her voice lost in the cacophony of war. And when the dust settled, when the victors stood amidst the fallen, it was her presence that lingered, a silent reminder that no triumph was without cost. But the Morrigan was not bound to war alone. She was the voice of prophecy, her words carrying the weight of unbreakable fate. She had foreseen the rise and fall of kings, the shifting tides of power, the inevitability of endings. She had warned of destruction, spoken of futures that few dared to face. And those who ignored her did so at their peril. It was said that she could appear as a maiden of unearthly beauty, her dark eyes gleaming with secrets untold. But in the next breath, she could be an old crone, her face lined with the knowledge of centuries, her gaze heavy with truths too great for mortal minds to bear. And then, as suddenly as she came, she would be gone, leaving only the lingering sense that something had shifted, that fate had taken another step toward its destined course. The night deepened, and the storm clouds above began to stir. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the sound of distant thunder. Somewhere beyond the reach of mortal sight, the Morrigan watched. She was always watching. And as long as there was war, as long as there was fate, as long as there were those who dared to challenge the will of the gods, she would remain. The crow let out a single cry, a sharp note that sliced through the quiet. Then, with a final beat of its wings, it vanished into the darkness, leaving only the weight of the inevitable in its wake. The Morrigan had spoken, and the world, whether it wished to or not, would listen. The night draped the land in a heavy shroud, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and rain yet to fall. A restless wind whispered through the valleys, weaving through the ancient stones that had stood long before the first sword was ever raised in battle. The Morrigan moved within the shadows, her presence unseen but deeply felt. To those who knew how to listen, the land itself spoke of her watchful gaze, her hand in the shaping of fate. Far below the looming hills, a river wound its way through the heart of Ireland, its waters dark and endless, mirroring the sky above. It was here, at the place where the world seemed to fold in upon itself, that she had once met the Dagda, the great god of the Tuatha De Danann. The night of Samhain had cast its veil over the land, the time when the boundary between the mortal realm and the otherworld grew thin, when whispers from beyond could slip into waking ears. The Morrigan stood by the river's edge, her form both ethereal and unyielding, the wind playing with the dark strands of her hair. The Dagda approached, his massive frame casting a long shadow against the moonlit earth. He was known as the good god, a force of strength and wisdom, his laughter as mighty as his wrath. But before the Morrigan, even he tread with care. She did not bow to kings or warriors. She was beyond them all. Yet on this night, They stood as equals, their meeting one of purpose rather than conquest. The river murmured secrets between them as they spoke, its voice lost beneath the rustling of unseen wings. Their union was not one of love as mortals knew it, but of something deeper, something older. It was the merging of war and wisdom, destruction and renewal. And when the night had passed, when the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the Morrigan whispered words that would shape the days to come. She spoke of battles yet to be fought, of tides that could not be turned, of victories that would be written in blood. And the Dagda, though mighty, could do nothing but listen, for her prophecies were not offerings, they were inevitabilities. Beyond the river, beyond the quiet stillness of that moment, the world moved ever closer to the edge of war. The Fomorians, the monstrous beings who had once ruled this land with iron and shadow, gathered their forces. They were creatures of chaos, born of the sea and storm. Their very presence an insult to the balance the Tuatha De Danann sought to maintain. Led by Balor of the Evil Eye, a being whose mere gaze could shatter life itself, they sought dominion over Ireland once more. The Morrigan knew this battle was coming. She had seen it in the weave of fate, in the shifting patterns of the wind, in the blood that seeped into the earth with every passing day. She did not fear war. She was war. She was the battle cry that sent warriors into the fray, the silence that followed when the last sword fell. And as the armies of the Tuatha De Danann gathered, preparing to face their greatest enemy, she walked among them, unseen yet ever present. Some would claim they saw a raven circling overhead, its dark wings slicing through the sky like a blade. Others swore they felt a whisper against their ear, a voice that promised either glory or ruin. But none doubted her presence. She had chosen her side, and that alone was enough to shift the course of battle. The days passed like a storm rolling in from the sea, slow at first, then with unstoppable fury. The battlefield, a vast stretch of land that had seen countless clashes before, stood waiting, hungry for the blood of gods and monsters alike. The Morrigan stood at its edge, watching as the first war cries shattered the morning air. The clash of metal rang out, a brutal symphony of chaos and fate. Warriors fell, their names already lost to time, their souls carried away by unseen hands. And above it all, the Morrigan soared, her form now that of a great black bird, her voice a piercing shriek that sent terror rippling through the enemy ranks. She did not fight with sword or spear. She did not need to. Fear was her weapon, prophecy her blade. She whispered doubt into the hearts of the Fomorian warriors, twisted their minds until they saw death before it had even reached them. To the Tuatha De Danann, she was an omen of strength, her presence a promise of victory. To the Fomorians, she was despair given form, a nightmare they could neither fight nor flee. And as the battle raged, as the ground drank deeply of life's last offerings, she saw the threads of fate tighten, weaving themselves into the final moments of kings and gods. Balor, the monstrous warlord of the Fomorians, stood at the heart of the battlefield, his one cursed eye hidden behind the folds of his brow. It was said that a single glance from him could end 1,000 lives, that his gaze was death itself. But fate had already chosen its champion. Lug, the warrior of the Tuatha De Danann, the bright one, the many-skilled, stood before the giant, his spear poised. The Morrigan had seen this moment long before it came to pass. She had whispered of it to the winds, sung of it in the rustling leaves, watched it unfold in the ripples of the river. The moment Balor's eye was forced open, the moment Lug's spear flew like lightning through the air, striking true, this was no mere act of war. This was destiny. The battlefield fell silent as Balor collapsed, his great form shaking the earth beneath him. The tide had turned, the Fomorians broken, their dominion shattered. And as the crows gathered, their dark forms descending upon the fallen, the Morrigan stood among them, silent, watchful. She did not weep for the dead. She did not rejoice for the living. She merely was. The battle was won, but victory was never without its cost. The Morrigan had seen it all before. She had seen it in the eyes of dying warriors, in the blood-soaked fields where history carved its name. She had seen it in the rise and fall of kings, in the endless cycle of war and peace, in the quiet that came only when there was no one left to raise a sword. The river still flowed. The wind still whispered. The world turned as it always had, as it always would. And somewhere, in the ever-present shadow between fate and war, the Morrigan watched, waiting for the next battle, the next ruler, the next thread in the great, unbreakable weave of destiny. The echoes of war faded into the hills, leaving the land heavy with silence. The battlefield, once alive with the clash of steel and the cries of the dying, now lay still beneath the watchful sky. The Morrigan stood at its edge, her gaze sweeping over the fallen. Blood darkened the earth, feeding the roots of the ancient trees that had borne witness to countless battles before this one. The cycle had turned once more, victory and death, power and ruin. The crows gathered around her, black feathers ruffled by the wind, their sharp eyes gleaming with the reflection of fate fulfilled. She had seen this before. She would see it again. The gods and their wars, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the shifting tides of power, all of it was nothing more than ripples in an endless river. The Morrigan did not mourn the dead, nor did she celebrate the living. She simply watched, as she always had, as she always would. The Tuatha De Danann moved through the field, gathering their wounded, laying to rest their slain. Among them walked Lug, the warrior whose spear had struck down Balor, the Fomorian warlord whose death had turned the tide. The weight of victory sat heavy on his shoulders, for he knew, as all great warriors did, that triumph was but a brief moment before the next battle. He glanced toward the Morrigan, his sharp eyes catching the glint of her presence in the shifting mist. He did not call to her, did not approach. One does not summon fate. One merely accepts its presence. The Morrigan turned away, her form shifting, the edges of her body dissolving into shadow and wind. Her work here was done, but the threads of fate continued to weave, and she was bound to follow. She stepped beyond the battlefield, beyond the realm of gods and warriors, into the quiet spaces where destiny whispered its secrets. The land itself pulsed beneath her feet, a living force that she had long been bound to. It was not just the gods who knew her name. The people of Ireland, those who tilled the soil and built their homes beneath the vast sky, had long spoken of the Morrigan in hushed tones. To some, she was the guardian of the land, the spirit of sovereignty who chose its rulers and cast down the unworthy. To others, she was the shadow at the edge of their dreams, the voice that carried warnings on the wind. They saw her in the flight of a crow, in the twisting patterns of the river, in the storm clouds that gathered before a great change. She had appeared before many, testing them, offering choices that would shape the course of history. Some she had blessed, granting them the strength to lead. Others she had cursed, stripping them of their power with nothing more than a whisper of what was to come. Kings had sought her favor, warriors had begged for her guidance, but the Morrigan did not offer gifts freely. Everything came at a price. There was a time when she had tested one such warrior, a man whose fate was bound as tightly as the strings of a harp. His name was Cuchulainn, a hero among mortals, his strength unmatched, his skill with a blade the stuff of legend. But even legends were not immune to fate. The Morrigan had come to him not as a goddess of war, but as a woman, her beauty a thing of moonlight and secrets. She had offered him her aid, her favor in the battles to come, but he had not known her for what she was. He had refused her, turning her away with the arrogance of a man who believed himself beyond the reach of destiny. And so the Morrigan wove a different path for him. She appeared again, but not as a woman this time. She was the wild things of the world, the forces that could not be tamed. She took the shape of an eel, slithering beneath his feet, seeking to trip him as he fought. He struck her aside. She became a wolf, her sharp teeth snapping at his heels, and again he lashed out. She became a heifer, charging through the chaos of battle. But still, he did not fall. Cuchulainn was strong, but fate was stronger. When he had bested her at every turn, the Morrigan came to him once more, her form now that of an old woman, her body broken, her voice laced with suffering. She revealed herself to him then, letting him see what he had done, that the wounds he had inflicted upon the creatures of the world had, in truth, been wounds upon the goddess herself. He had struck against fate, and though he had won these battles, the war was not yet over. Later, when his own time came, when the weight of his choices and the inevitability of destiny bore down upon him, it was the Morrigan who stood at the end of his path. He had fought as only a man destined for legend could fight, but even the greatest warriors cannot outrun what has already been woven. As he lay dying, his body bound to the standing stone where he had made his final stand, a single crow landed upon his shoulder, a silent witness, a final omen. The Morrigan did not linger after that. Her task was never to revel in death, but to guide it, to mark the passing of those who had fulfilled their fate. She was there when kings rose and when they fell. She was there when battles were waged and when peace was forged in the silence that followed. She was not the cause of war, nor the end of it. She was the space between, the shadow that stretched from one moment to the next. And so, as she walked through the hills, the rivers, the quiet spaces where mortal feet rarely tread, she listened. The wind carried whispers of new battles, new rulers, new stories waiting to be told. The cycle would turn again, as it always had. And the Morrigan would be there, watching, waiting, guiding. The night stretched wide above her, the sky vast and filled with secrets. The land beneath her feet hummed with the pulse of history, of the stories yet to be written. And somewhere in the darkness, the crows began to gather once more. The mist curled low over the land, moving like a living thing, twisting through the hollows of the hills and creeping along the banks of the Black River. The Morrigan walked through it unseen, her steps silent upon the damp earth. The night was thick with the scent of rain, the sky heavy with storm clouds that had not yet broken. The world was caught in the quiet before the tempest, balanced upon the edge of something vast and inevitable. She had always known this silence. It was the hush before the clash of swords, the moment when warriors gripped their weapons and felt the weight of fate pressing upon their shoulders. She was not only the goddess of war, but of the space between the waiting, the knowing, the slow unraveling of time that led to a single, shattering moment. The river whispered as it wound through the valley, its voice lost beneath the rustling of unseen wings. The crows had gathered, dark shapes against the sky, their watchful eyes gleaming like embers in the night. They were her messengers, her shadows, her harbingers. Where they went, she was never far behind. A lone figure stood at the edge of the water, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed upon the slow-moving current. The moon cast a pale glow over him, illuminating the sharp angles of his face, the tight grip of his hands at his sides. He was young, but his eyes were older, shadowed with the weight of things he had seen and things he had yet to understand. He did not see her approach, not at first. But then, as if sensing the shift in the air, he turned, his breath caught in his throat. Before him stood a woman unlike any he had ever known. Her hair was dark as a raven's wing, flowing like liquid shadow over her shoulders. Her eyes gleamed like polished obsidian, holding depths he could not fathom. She was beautiful, but there was something unsettling about her presence, something ancient and vast, as if she was not merely standing before him, but surrounding him, woven into the very fabric of the night itself. "You stand upon the edge of something," she said, her voice soft, yet carrying with it the weight of inevitability. The warrior swallowed hard, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "I know," he said. She tilted her head slightly, watching him with the patience of one who had seen this moment 1,000 times before. "Do you know what awaits you?" He hesitated. Victory. A slow smile touched her lips, though it was not a smile of amusement. "Victory," she repeated, tasting the word as if it were something fragile and fleeting. "And what price will you pay for it?" His jaw tightened. He did not answer, for he did not yet know. But she did. She always did. She stepped closer, the mist curling around her ankles like restless spirits. "There are many kinds of victories," she murmured. "Some are won with steel, others with sacrifice, and some are nothing more than the illusion of triumph, hiding the weight of a loss yet to come." He stiffened at her words, his gaze searching hers. "Who are you?" She reached out, brushing her fingertips lightly against his cheek. The touch was cool, feather-light, like the breath of the wind before a storm. "I am the one who watches," she said, "the one who knows." A crow cawed sharply in the distance, and in the space between heartbeats, she was gone. The warrior stood alone, his breath shallow, his mind racing. The river continued its slow, ceaseless journey, its surface unbroken, as if nothing had disturbed the night at all. But he knew better. The Morrigan had come to him, and that meant the course of fate had already been set. The battle came with the dawn, the sky painted in hues of crimson and gold, as if the world itself bled in anticipation of what was to come. The armies gathered upon the field, their banners snapping in the wind, their weapons gleaming beneath the rising sun. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and steel, of damp earth, and the lingering promise of blood yet to be spilled. The Morrigan was there, though unseen by mortal eyes. She moved through the ranks, whispering into the ears of warriors, watching the flicker of doubt in some, the burn of unshakable resolve in others. She was the weight in their chests, the shiver down their spines, the nameless feeling that told them they stood at the precipice of something far greater than themselves. Above, the crows circled, their cries sharp and piercing, weaving through the air like the strands of fate itself. They knew what was coming. They always did. The first clash of swords shattered the silence. The ground trembled beneath the stampede of feet, the earth drinking deep of the lifeblood of gods and men alike. The battle roared to life, a cacophony of screams and steel, of the raw, chaotic symphony of war. The Morrigan walked among them, unseen yet ever present. She saw the shifting tides, the moments when fate twisted, when a single stroke of a blade could turn the course of history. She whispered into the wind, her voice threading through the cries of battle, guiding the hands of those she favored, sowing discord among those she did not. Victory was coming, but at what cost? In the end, when the last sword fell, when the final cry had faded into silence, the battlefield lay strewn with the fallen. The warriors who remained standing did not cheer, did not revel in their triumph. They simply breathed, weary and bloodied, knowing that they had survived while others had not. The Morrigan stood at the edge of the field, her form shifting in the mist, the crows gathering around her feet. She did not speak. She did not need to. The story had been written. The battle had played its part in the grand, unyielding weave of fate. She turned away, her gaze lifting to the horizon, where the sky stretched wide and endless, filled with the whispers of things yet to come, because there would always be another battle. Another warrior standing at the river's edge, waiting for the weight of fate to settle upon his shoulders. Another story waiting to unfold. The cycle never ended, and neither did she. The storm had come and gone, but the echoes of battle still lingered in the air. The earth, dark and damp with blood, held the memory of those who had fallen. The wind carried their voices, the whispers of warriors who had met their fate beneath the unfeeling sky. The Morrigan walked among them, unseen, her presence felt in the silence that followed war. She did not mourn, for she was not made for grief. Death was neither an end nor a beginning to her. It was simply the turning of the wheel, the inevitable shift from one state to another. She had seen this countless times before, had watched kings and heroes rise only to be swallowed by time. No warrior, no ruler, no empire was beyond the grasp of fate. A crow landed upon the shoulder of a fallen warrior, its black feathers glistening in the dim morning light. It cocked its head, watching, waiting, as if expecting him to rise once more. But he would not. His story had ended, as all stories must. The Morrigan reached out, her fingers brushing over his brow, and in that moment, something passed between them, something that had no name, something as fleeting as breath, as final as the closing of a door. She straightened, her gaze lifting to the horizon. War had reshaped the land, but its hunger was never sated. There would be more battles, more rulers, more choices that would tip the scales one way or another. She turned away from the fallen, her form dissolving into shadow and mist, carried upon the wind to the places where fate wove its next tale. Beyond the battlefield, beyond the rivers and hills, there was a place untouched by war, a place where the land breathed in quiet slumber, where the hands of men had not yet carved their will into the earth. It was here that the Morrigan came, drawn by something older than kings, older than war itself. A figure stood waiting for her, his presence as vast as the sky, as unshakable as the roots of the ancient trees. The Dagda, the good god, the one who had met her at the river's edge on the night of Samhain, when the veil between worlds had been at its thinnest. He was a god of wisdom, of abundance, of laughter and sorrow alike. But there was no laughter in his gaze now, only knowing. "You have seen it," he said, his voice carrying across the stillness. The Morrigan did not answer immediately. She stepped closer, the space between them charged with something neither mortal nor divine could name. "It has already begun," she murmured. "The weave is tightening. The cycle turns again." The Dagda inclined his head. He, too, had seen the signs. The shifting of the winds, the way the rivers carried whispers of unrest. He had walked the battlefields, felt the tremors in the earth, heard the voices of those who had already been claimed by destiny. "The Tuatha De Danann will not rule forever," she said. A silence stretched between them, deep and unbroken. They both knew the truth of it. Even gods were bound by fate. Even those who shaped the world would, in time, be undone by it. The Morrigan had seen it in the patterns of the stars, in the bones scattered upon the ground, in the flight of the ravens that carried omens upon their wings. There is still time, the Dagda said at last. Time to shape what is to come. The Morrigan tilted her head, studying him. You speak as though fate may be bent to our will. He did not answer. Perhaps he knew that to challenge fate was to fight a battle already lost. But he also knew that even inevitability could be met on one's own terms. The future was not a single path, but a river with many tributaries. Some were shallow, some deep, but all led to the same sea. She stepped closer, close enough to see the lines of time upon his face, the weight of the knowledge he carried. The war is not yet over, she said softly. No, he agreed, nor will it ever be. A crow cawed overhead, breaking the stillness, and in that sound was the truth of it all. The world would not rest. The cycle would not end. There would always be those who rose, those who fell, and those who stood in the space between, watching it all unfold. The Morrigan turned, her form shifting once more, her body dissolving into the gathering mist. She had spoken her warnings, had laid the threads where they needed to be placed. Now, it was only a matter of time. The land waited, as it always did. The rivers ran, carrying the echoes of things yet to come. And somewhere, beyond the reach of gods and men alike, fate continued its endless weave. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and dying embers, the remnants of a battlefield long since abandoned. The land, scarred by war, had begun to heal, though the ghosts of those who had fallen lingered in the silence. The Morrigan walked through the quiet ruins of fate, her presence unseen, yet deeply felt. The world never truly rested, not while power shifted hands, not while war brewed beneath the surface like a fire waiting to rise. The Tuatha De Danann had won their battles, but victory was never the end. It was merely another turn in the cycle, another step toward the inevitable. The gods who had claimed Ireland as their own ruled with wisdom and strength, but even they were bound by time, by fate, by the whispers of futures they could not escape. Far from the eyes of kings and warriors, the Morrigan stood at the edge of a black river, its waters slow and unyielding. She had seen this river before, in dreams, in visions, in the countless stories that wound through the fabric of the world. It was the river of endings, the threshold between what was and what would be. She was not alone. The shadows stirred beside her, shifting and stretching as another figure took form. A woman, tall and unearthly, her hair the color of dried blood, her eyes burning with the light of battle yet to be fought. Bodybe, one of the three who shared the name of the Morrigan, one of the three faces of war and fate. Sister, Bodybe murmured, her voice like the rustling of leaves before a storm. The Morrigan inclined her head, acknowledging the presence of her other self. They were separate, yet one. Fragments of the same force, woven into different aspects of destruction and prophecy. The land stirs, Bodybe continued. The people whisper of change. The Morrigan knew this already. She had felt it in the shifting winds, in the restless movements of the crows that carried omens upon their wings. The balance of power was never still for long. Even gods had their time, and the Tuatha De Danann were not exempt from the rules that governed all things. "There is a new force rising," Bodiby said, her gaze fixed upon the river. "You have seen them." The Morrigan had. In the quiet spaces between wakefulness and dreams, she had seen the faces of those who would come. The sons of Mill, mortals, yet not ordinary men. They carried the blood of distant lands, the hunger of conquerors, the will to claim what they believed to be theirs. "They will come," the Morrigan said, her voice even unshaken. "They will take. They will bleed." Bodiby's smile was sharp, knowing. "And what will we do, sister?" The Morrigan's gaze did not waver. "We will do what we have always done. We will guide. We will watch. We will weave the strands of fate." Bodiby nodded, satisfied. The river moved on, slow and ceaseless, uncaring of the struggles of gods and men alike. It would bear witness to what was to come, just as it had witnessed all that had come before. The Morrigan stepped away from the water, her form dissolving into the mist, carried upon the winds that whispered of war. Across the land, the Tuatha De Danann ruled as they always had. But the crows had begun to gather once more. The storm was coming, and the Morrigan would be there to see it unfold. The sky was a canvas of shifting grays, the storm clouds rolling in from the sea like silent armies. The air was thick with the promise of rain, but it was not water that would soak the land in the coming days. Blood would spill before the river swelled, before the winds carried the cries of the fallen across the hills. The Morrigan had seen it all before. She had walked this path many times, watched as power unraveled and rewove itself into new hands. The Tuatha De Danann sat upon their thrones, rulers of Ireland, their dominions stretching from the mountains to the sea. They had fought for this land, bled for it, shaped it with their will and their magic. But the threads of fate were tightening once more, and the storm that approached was unlike any they had faced before. The sons of Mill had set their sights upon Ireland. They were men, but not just men, they were warriors from across the sea, their bloodline touched by distant gods, their souls sharpened by conquest. They came not as wanderers, not as seekers of peace, but as claimants to a throne they believed was rightfully theirs. And the Morrigan, standing at the threshold of war, knew that nothing would remain unchanged. She stood upon a high cliff, the wind tearing through her dark hair, her cloak billowing like the wings of the crows circling above. The sea raged below, white-capped waves crashing against the rocks, a force as relentless as time itself. The waters had carried these new invaders to Ireland's shores, and soon they would carry away the remnants of those who failed to stand against them. A voice broke the silence beside her. "You feel it too." She did not turn. She did not need to. She knew who had come. Matcha, another face of the Morrigan, another aspect of war and sovereignty. She was the red horse upon the battlefield, the fire that burned away the weak, the force that ensured only the worthy remained. "They are close," Matcha continued, stepping beside her, her golden eyes gleaming like embers in the fading light. "The men of Mill, they come to take what does not belong to them." The Morrigan's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Does anything ever belong to anyone for long?" Matcha scoffed, the sound filled with both amusement and understanding. "The Tuatha De Danann will not yield." "No," the Morrigan agreed, "but neither will the sons of Mill." A storm was coming, one that no spell, no blade, no plea could halt. It was written in the ripples of the water, in the way the crows moved restlessly across the sky, in the unshakable weight pressing upon the land itself. The Tuatha De Danann would fight. They would summon the winds, call upon the magic that had shaped Ireland into the land of gods and legends. But the sons of Mill had their own power, the strength of the mortal will, the force that even gods could not always break. "They will reach the land soon," Matcha said. The Morrigan nodded. "And when they do, the rivers will run red." She turned away from the sea, from the horizon that carried the inevitable toward them. She had no need to see the ships. She already knew they were coming. The wind howled as she moved, her form flickering like a shadow caught between worlds. The land whispered beneath her feet, the stones remembering the steps of all those who had walked before her, all those who had fought and fallen, all those who had believed they could outrun fate. But fate had no mercy. The Tuatha De Danann prepared for war, their forces gathering upon the sacred hills, their spells weaving through the air like unseen currents. The land was their ally, the magic of Ireland itself pulsing beneath their feet. But even the gods could not hold back the tide forever, and the Morrigan, she was neither on one side nor the other. She was the space between, the watcher, the whisper in the wind that carried both prophecy and warning. The storm had arrived. The wind howled through the valleys, carrying the scent of salt and rain, the promise of a storm both of nature and of war. The ships of the sons of Mill had reached the shores, their sails dark against the gray sky, their warriors stepping onto the land with the quiet confidence of men who believed their fate was already sealed. The sea had carried them here, and the land would soon test their worth. High above, upon the sacred hills of Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann stood waiting. Their magic wove through the air like mist, ancient and unseen, binding the elements to their will. They were gods of this land, rulers by divine right, and they would not surrender without a fight. The Morrigan moved unseen through the gathering storm, her presence a whisper in the wind, a shadow flickering at the edges of the world. She had no loyalty to either side, not truly. She was not a queen who ruled, nor a warrior who fought for one cause or another. She was fate, the force that bent even the will of gods to its purpose. Matcha was there, standing among the Tuatha De Danann, her crimson cloak snapping in the wind. She was battle given form, the unyielding will of those who refused to bow. Body beast circled overhead in the form of a crow, her sharp cries slicing through the air like blades, an omen of bloodshed yet to come. The men of Mill will not turn back, Matcha murmured, her gaze locked upon the distant figures moving across the shore. They are not like the Fomorians. They are not beasts of chaos. They are men. And men, once they have set their minds upon something, do not break easily. The Morrigan's dark eyes gleamed. No, they do not. And that was what made them dangerous. The Tuatha De Danann had fought countless battles, had wielded magic strong enough to shape the land itself. But the sons of Mill had something different. They had mortality. They had desperation. They had the will of those who knew their time was limited and fought all the harder because of it. The first clash came with the rising tide. The sons of Mill charged forward, their weapons gleaming beneath the stormlit sky. The Tuatha De Danann met them, their spells twisting the air, the earth itself shifting to their command. And the Morrigan watched. The battle unfolded like a story already written, its pages turning with every stroke of a blade, every cry of pain, every drop of blood that seeped into the soil. The wind howled louder, and the sky darkened as the Tuatha De Danann called upon their greatest magic. The storm rose, the waves swelling high, crashing down upon the invaders with relentless force. The gods summoned the winds, sent them tearing through the ranks of their enemies, driving them back toward the sea. The sons of Mill faltered, their footing lost upon the shifting ground. It seemed, for a moment, that the Tuatha De Danann would triumph once more, but fate had already chosen its victor. The sons of Mill were not merely warriors. They were men who carried knowledge, who understood that even the mightiest forces of nature could be tamed. And so, they did not fight the storm. They spoke to it. They called upon their own magic, not the magic of gods, but the magic of words, of mortal will. They sang to the land, to the winds, to the spirits that dwelled within Ireland itself. They called for balance, for fairness, for the right to claim what had been promised to them. And the land listened. The winds calmed. The waves withdrew. The storm, once commanded by the Tuatha De Danann, slipped from their grasp. The Morrigan's lips parted slightly, a whisper of a smile curving at their edges. Fate was shifting. The Tuatha De Danann, for all their strength, for all their wisdom, saw the truth of it then. The land no longer belonged to them alone. It had chosen new rulers. The battle was not lost in steel or blood. It was lost in the quiet turn of destiny, in the will of the world itself. The gods would not rule Ireland forever. The cycle had turned. The storm had passed, but the air remained heavy, thick with the weight of what had transpired. The battlefield lay quiet now, the echoes of battle fading into the hills, swallowed by the land itself. The Morrigan stood upon the edge of it all, watching as fate unraveled before her. As the cycle shifted in ways even the gods could not deny, the Tuatha De Danann, once the unchallenged rulers of Ireland, had lost their grip on the land they had shaped. The sons of Mill stood victorious, though not by might alone. It had not been their swords that had won them Ireland, nor their numbers, nor their strength. It had been the will of the land itself, the balance that demanded change. Even gods could not fight what had already been woven into the threads of destiny. Matcha stood at the edge of the battlefield, her gaze distant, unreadable. She had fought for the Tuatha De Danann as she always had, as she always would. She was war incarnate, unyielding, unstoppable. And yet, even she could see that this was not a battle that could be won with blade or spell. The gods had met their match, not in warriors, but in time itself. The sons of Mill walked among the fallen, collecting their dead, murmuring to one another in voices edged with both sorrow and triumph. They knew what had happened, even if they did not yet understand the full weight of it. They had claimed Ireland, not as conquerors, but as inheritors. The Morrigan turned away from the battlefield, her form shifting, slipping between the mist and shadow. She did not need to see what would happen next. She had already seen it. The Tuatha De Danann, proud and powerful, would not vanish, nor would they be slain. Instead, they would step aside, retreating into the hidden places of the world, into the hills and beneath the rivers, into the unseen realms where the gods still whispered in the ears of those who knew how to listen. They would become the Aus-She, the fair folk, the spirits of the land. No longer kings, no longer rulers, but ever present, watching from the edges of the mortal world. The sons of Mill would take their place upon the throne of Ireland. They would build their kingdoms, carve their names into stone and legend. But they, too, would not rule forever. The wheel would turn again, as it always did, as it always must. The crows gathered around the Morrigan's feet, their dark eyes gleaming with the knowledge of what had come to pass. She knelt, running her fingers through the damp earth, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her touch. It would go on. It always did. You knew this would happen, came a voice behind her. She did not turn. She did not need to. She knew the voice. Bodiby, the third sister, the chaos of war, the shrieking cry of death on the battlefield. I knew, the Morrigan murmured. And yet, still they fought. Bodiby stepped beside her, her gaze sweeping over the battlefield, over the fallen, over the warriors who still stood. Men always fight, even when the outcome has already been written. The Morrigan exhaled softly, the sound neither sorrow nor satisfaction, but something in between. And so the cycle turns. Bodiby tilted her head, studying her sister, studying the land, studying the mortals who now held Ireland in their grasp. What happens now? The Morrigan stood, her dark cloak billowing in the fatting wind. She looked toward the horizon, toward the endless future stretching before them. Now we wait. For what? The Morrigan's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. For the next war, because there would always be another war, another rise and fall, another turning of the wheel. Ireland belonged to men now, but men were never free of the pull of fate. The crows took flight, their dark wings slicing through the air, their cries echoing across the land. The Morrigan watched them go, knowing they would return when the time was right, when the next battle called, when the next story began.